Study Session 14, St. Thomas Aquinas. Introduction. In this study session, you will learn the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas, who perfected the scholastic method by Christianizing Aristotle. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the profile of St. Thomas. 2. Describe the issues in the Christianization of Aristotle. 3. Explain Aquinas' attempt at reconciling faith and reason. 4. Describe Aquinas' conception of the state. 5. Identify the nature of law in the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. 14.1. About St. Thomas Aquinas. Thomas was born in 1225 near Naples. His father was a Count of Aquino, who had hoped that his son would someday enjoy high ecclesiastical position. For this reason, Thomas was placed in the Abbey of Monte Cassino as a boy of 5, and for the next 9 years he pursued his studies in the Benedictine Abbey. At the age of 14, he entered the University of Naples, but while in that city, he was fascinated by the life of some Dominican friars at a nearby convent and decided to enter their order. As the Dominicans were particularly dedicated to teaching, Thomas had, upon entering their order, resolved to give himself to a religious and also a teaching vocation. 4 years later, he entered the University of Paris, where he came under the influence of a prodigious scholar whose enormous intellectual achievements had earned him the names Albert the Great and the universal teacher. Albert recognized the significance of philosophy and science for grounding Christian faith and for developing the capacities of the human mind. While other theologians looked askance at secular learning, Albert concluded that the Christian thinker must master philosophical and scientific learning in all its forms. Unlike Albert, who did not change anything in the philosophers he quoted in his works, Thomas used Aristotle more creatively, systematically, and with a more specific recognition of the harmony between what Aristotle said and the Christian faith. After an interval of teaching under the auspices of the papal court from 1259 to 1222 to 1268, Thomas returned once again to Paris and became involved in the celebrated controversy with the Averroists. In 1274, Pope Gregory X called him to Lyons to participate in a council, and while on his way there, he died in a monastery between Naples and Rome at the age of 49. Thomas left a huge literary legacy. Among his principal works are his commentaries on many of Aristotle's writings, careful arguments against the errors of the Greeks and the Averroists. His most renowned literary achievements are his 2 major theological works, the Summa Contra Gentiles and Summa Theologica. Christianization of Aristotle. Besides its theological orientation, the University of Paris had receptivity to universal knowledge. This accounts for the gradual acceptance and triumph of Aristotle's philosophy at Paris. It is easily apparent, however, that the invasion of Aristotelianism would raise problems of orthodoxy. There was, however, not only the concern over the impact of Aristotle's philosophy upon Christian thought, but also serious questions over whether Aristotle had been faithfully and accurately interpreted by the Arabians, from whom the medieval world got access to Aristotle. Again, Aristotle's thought would, if incorporated into theology, produce serious errors. For example, to deny the Platonic ideas or forms, as Aristotle had done, would mean that God does not possess in himself the ideas of all things and would therefore be ignorant of the concrete and particular verse. This would also mean that events occur either by chance or through mechanical necessity. Even more serious was Bonaventura's charge that if God does not think the ideas of the world, he would not have created it. On this point, Aquinas was later to have serious difficulties with the church authorities, for in following Aristotle, he could discover no decisive reason for denying that the world has always existed instead of being created at a point in time. Aristotelian philosophy was then considered dangerous and was banned. Still, because Aristotle's thought was so formidable and so systematic concerning matters of nature and science, its forward march was irresistible and its triumph virtually inevitable. Therefore, if Aristotle was to be accepted, the specific task of the theologians would now be to Christianize Aristotle, that is, to harmonize his philosophy with Christianity or to reconcile reason with faith. This was what Aquinas set out to do. Reconciliation of faith, theology with reason, philosophy. Aquinas taught and wrote as a Christian. He, however, relied upon philosophy of Aristotle, a pagan philosopher, in writing his Christian theological works. It was his view that philosophy and theology played complementary roles in humanity's quest for truth. Like his teacher, Albert the Great, Aquinas went to great pains to delineate the boundaries between faith and reason, indicating what philosophy and theology respectively could and could not provide to the human mind. Philosophy and theology were therefore viewed in relation to humanity's end, being distinguished by their different ways of contributing to humanity's knowledge of God. Philosophy proceeds from principles discovered by human reason, whereas theology is the rational ordering of principles received from authoritative revelation and held as a matter of faith. Aquinas saw specific differences between philosophy and theology, between reason and faith. 1. Philosophy begins with the immediate objects of sense experience and reasons upward to more general conceptions until, as in Aristotle's case, the mind fastens upon the highest principles or first cause of being, ending in the conception of God. While theology begins with a faith in God and first interprets all things as creatures of God. 2. Philosophy draws its conclusions from its rational description of the essences of things, whereas the theologian rests the demonstration of his conclusions upon the authority of revealed knowledge. Again, theology and philosophy do not contradict each other, but not everything philosophy discusses is significant for a person's religious end. Though revelation is above reason, it is in no way contrary to reason. Faith is fulfillment of reason. Together they build the temple of knowledge, but nowhere do they conflict or work at cross purposes. There is a unity of the object of philosophy and theology, since they are both concerned with truth. Aristotle had considered the object of philosophy the study of first principles and causes, study of being and its causes, and this led to a first mover, which he understood as the ground of truth in the universe. This is the philosophical way of saying what the theologian has set as his object of knowledge, namely God's being and the truth this reveals about the created world. Aquinas' conception of the state. The state, said Aquinas, is a natural institution. It is derived from nature of humanity. In this view, Aquinas was following the political theory of Aristotle, from whom he had taken the phrase that man is by nature a political animal. The difference between Aristotle and Aquinas was in the role or task of the state. Aristotle supposed that the state could provide for all the needs of humanity because he knew only of natural needs. Aquinas, on the other hand, believed that in addition to its material or natural needs, humanity also has a supernatural end. The state is not equipped to deal with this more ultimate end of humanity. It is the church that directs humanity to this end. Aquinas looked upon the state and explained its origin in terms of God's creation. The state, in this view, is willed by God and has its God-given function. It was required because of the social nature of humanity. The state is not, for Aquinas, as it was for Augustine, a product of people's sinfulness. Aquinas said that even in the state of innocence, man would have lived in society. A common life could not exist unless there was someone in control to attend to the common good. The state's function is to secure the common good by keeping the peace, organizing the activities of the citizens into harmonious pursuits, providing for the resources to sustain life, and preventing as far as possible obstacles to the good life. This last item concerning threat to good life gives to the state not only a function tied to humanity's ultimate end, it is also accounts for the state's position in relation to the church. The state is subordinate to the church. The state has a sphere in which it has legitimate function, and that at the same time it must subordinate itself to the church. Within its own sphere, the state is autonomous, but insofar as there are aspects of human life that bear upon humanity's supernatural end, the state must not put arbitrary hindrances in the way to frustrate humanity's spiritual life. The church does not challenge the autonomy of the state. It only says that the state is not absolutely autonomous. The state is like a person. Neither the state nor a person has only a natural end. In this way, Aquinas affirmed the legitimacy of the state and its autonomy in its own sphere, subordinating it to the church only to ensure that the ultimate spiritual end of a person be taken into account. As the state rules the behavior of its citizens through the agency of law, the state is in turn limited by the requirements of just laws. Nowhere is Aquinas' rejection of the absolute autonomy of the state so clearly stated as when he described the standards for the making of human or positive law. 14.5. The nature of law. Aquinas' constant attempt was to relate human law as closely as possible to divine law. Human law was for him part and parcel of the old system of divine government whereby everything both in heaven and on earth is ruled. Such a system Thomas regarded as quite literally an emanation from the reason of God, regulating the relationships between all creatures, animate and inanimate, animal and human law, animal and human. Law in the narrower human sense was therefore merely one aspect, important indeed, but still an aspect of a cosmic fact. An unlawful ruler was not primarily a violator of human rights and institutions, though he was that, but a rebel against the old divine system by which God rules the world. His classification of law was one of the most characteristic parts of his philosophy. In his fourfold classification of law, only one of the four is human. His four kinds of law are four forms of reason, manifesting themselves at four levels of cosmic reality, but remaining one reason throughout, the names of which he gave them were the eternal law, the natural law, the divine law, and human law. The eternal law. This is practically identical with the reason of God. It is the eternal plan of divine wisdom by which the whole creation is ordered. In itself, the law is above the physical nature of man and its entirety, beyond human comprehension. though it is not for this reason foreign or contrary to human reason. Natural law. This may be described as a reflection of divine reason in created things. It is manifest in the inclination which nature implants in all beings to seek good and avoid evil, to preserve themselves and to live as perfectly as possible the kind of life suitable to their natural endowments. For Aquinas, natural law consists of that portion of the eternal law that pertains particularly to people. His reasoning is that all things partake somewhat of the eternal law, from its being imprinted on them, and from this all things derive their inclinations to their proper acts and ends. Divine law. By divine law, Aquinas meant substantially revelation. An example would be the special code of laws which God gave to the Jews as the chosen people, or special rules of Christian morals or legislation, given through Scripture or the Church. Divine law is a gift of God's grace rather than a discovery of natural reason. Human law. This is the law essentially designed for human beings. It refers to the specific statutes of governments. These statutes or human laws are derived from the general precepts of natural law. Human law might be said not to introduce any new principles. It merely applies to humankind the greater principles of order that prevail throughout the world, just as we draw conclusions of the various sciences from naturally known indemonstrable principles, so also from the precepts of the natural law, the human reason needs to proceed to the more particular determination of certain matters. And these particular determinations devised by human reason are called human laws. Any law sets a standard according to which a being of some sort is moved to act or restrain from acting. In the case of human beings, since man is distinguished from other beings by rationality, the standard is set by reason, and since reasonableness in man implies sociability, the law sets a standard of general good rather than an individual will. It is the product of the whole people acting for their joint good, either by legislation or by the less tangible means of creating customs, or it has the sanction of a public personage to whom the care of the community has been delegated. Finally, Thomas regarded the promulgation as an essential quality of law. His completed definition therefore describes law as an ordinance of reason for the common good, made by him who has care of the community and promulgated. Study session summary. In this study session, you have learned that 1. Thomas used Aristotle more creatively, systematically, and with a more specific recognition of the harmony between what Aristotle said and the Christian faith. 2. If Aristotle was to be accepted, the specific task of the theologians would now be to Christianize Aristotle, that is, to harmonize his philosophy with Christianity or to reconcile reason with faith. 3. Though revelation is above reason, according to Aquinas, it is in no way contrary to reason. Faith is fulfillment of reason. Together they build the temple of knowledge, but nowhere do they conflict or work at cross purposes. 4. The state is a natural institution derived from nature of humanity. 5. The state has a sphere in which it has legitimate function, and that at the same time it must subordinate itself to the church. 6. An unlawful ruler was not primarily a violator of human rights and institutions, though he was that, but a rebel against the old divine system by which God rules the world. End of study session 14. Thank you for listening.